who forgave her, loved her, and supported Isabella. And even when she ran away with Hainaut, still forgave her and allowed and supported her financially until she died. And that's part of the problem as well. So she creates the possibility for a happily ever after romantic ending in their little cottage in the woods. This resolution is defeated by Hainaut's father, the absent paternal authority, who is intransigent and materialistic and leads into war, hence to ultimate tragedy. So the portrayal of Hainaut himself also supports this. He can't live, he doesn't really like living in the cottage. He's used to a life of luxury, whereas she is used to a life of discipline and privation. And so, like his father, he exercises control and has her take this wholly unconscionable vow never to return to the convent, a parodic parallel to her first vow. So he puts her into a position of being perjured no matter what. And he talks about how if you go back to the convent, you'll be denied your nature, the privilege of your creation, which is, of course, your sexuality, which serves me. Okay. As suggested in the feminist challenge of the story's opening, and this is where Ben interrogates the whole thing about blaming Eve for the world's ills, and instead places the blame on male perfidy. In this narrative, we see a woman struggling to live with integrity, but doing so as to construct her own inner nature in accordance with these socially defined and feminine natures. So she's caught in a contrast. So her crimes on paper are a lot more heinous than those of Miranda. I mean, Miranda simply sexually assaulted a guy as far as she could, whereas Isabella's murdered a couple of them, both her husbands. Isabella, nonetheless, is represented as the ideal woman, inside and out. Her outer self and inner self are united. Her inclination is the same as her duty. She is rational and steadfast and fulfills prescribed feminine ideals in her discretion and her conduct, as well as her wit and her beauty. So the conduct book ideal of devotion and compliance is like that of the perfect nun, Isabella. She lives with chaste widowhood for as long as she can, and even virtuous domesticity after that. She doesn't even have visits from other women. The conduct books don't like that. So absolute is her devotion to her husband. So her married life is nun-like, and her devotion to God and her husband. This history embodies the double edge of monastic convention in post-Reformation England and uses it as a lens to focus on the female condition. It portrays the convent on one hand as unnaturally repressive of desire, and on the other as enabling the female to reach her full potential of mind and spirit. Marriage, on the other hand, is ultimately destructive of both. Isabella, the perfect woman inside and out, not unlike Richardson's Clarissa 60 years later, is caught in the no-win situation created by a paternalistic economic system, which she could only have escaped through denial of her physical nature and marriage to Christ as a nun, an option that Clarissa longs for, incidentally, but is denied. On one level, the story can be seen as supporting the anti-convent convention on marriage and religious vocation. Her ill fate stems from the breaking of her vow, and the sentimental narrative strategies of coincidence and improbability underline that. I mean, who expected it to come back? Isabella only regains her peace in the quasi-monastic confinement of the prison and the prospect of death, which she meets arrayed like a bride, the bride of Christ. And she's, giving to charity and speaking and giving to so many people spiritually and materially in her final days. Clearly, in the spiritual realm, she has received forgiveness. On another level, this is a narrative of a woman who tries to conform to those externally determined ideals and who falls between the impossible contradictions of contemporary construction of female character. She is both sinner and saint. So in paternalistic social structures, purely feminine space is paradox. It can be both freedom and confinement, depending on whether it is viewed from the inside or the outside, from the feminine or masculine points of view. 18th century feminist studies, I think, are poised to expand into this multiplicity of female perspectives, and the last part of this actually dealt with modern-day Islamic women, and the notion in moderate but Islamic societies, many of them make a similar claim that the restrictions on dress are not oppressive, but in fact liberating, and this is a good chunk that I left out here that I had to. But 18th century studies are posed to expand into this multiplicity of female perspectives that put female experience at the center, resisting Eurocentric perspectives that are themselves based in a masculinist dichotomy that judges from the outside rather than the inside. Thank you.
No, that's sorry more people were here. It was excellent, really. I'm looking at the time, and I don't know. I know that you and Jamie, right? Jamie and Simone were going to lunch with her. But do you have a question? You have a question. This gentleman is interested in your topic, and he's a new graduate student here. She's from my department, but she's in Arabic studies, and you mentioned the Islamic, so they might have questions. And I thought of that when I was thinking of May Cycli worked on that when she was talking of her colleagues, really. So maybe, I'm watching the time, and she has to get back, but maybe the two of you have questions. They're going to lunch with her so they can talk to her.
We can hold back. Hold back.
Yeah, normally I wouldn't do that, but I think that way because Catherine's on a tight schedule, and you have to go to teach again. So, did you have a...
I didn't want to hold anyone's line.
No, just a couple of questions. I mean, if Catherine's like, you're comfortable with that.
On Dryden, he was the one more or less put in charge in the attempt to form the Academy of English. That was never formed.
No, you think it's Sam Johnson. I think, or you think
Dryden, the Royal Society in the 60s.
Yes, that's right, yes.
He was trying to reform the language, but he meant existence.
No, the whole language in the 17th century was certainly that's another area entirely where they're trying to there was Johnson was probably the final person to recognize that out of this chaos of the speech, as he calls it in the dictionary preface. But Dryden and the Royal Society, yes, there was a lot of philosophical movements looking at the relationship between language and meaning. And what you're probably thinking of is Spratt's History of the Royal Society. And Dryden would be resistant to that. And what he does in most of his prefaces is he slides in literary theory. So his body of literary theory, rather than existing in a single volume, is from the prefaces of the plays, including this one, incidentally. So the totally unrelated discussions go on, unrelated to the topic of the play. And certainly the privileging of wit and metaphors, wit being the propriety of thoughts and words, that's Dryden. And so you have a completely other subject, I could talk on it for hours, but briefly, what you have Dryden being involved with is more a kind of almost, I mean, he's in a double position there in terms of rhetoric, because the Royal Society was seeking for greater clarity in language, for scientific clarity, but it also is part of a response in the sort of Puritan and Raymist tendencies in 17th century England to reject metaphor and anything that sort of comes in between. So they wanted transparency in language. And of course, what poets recognizes that is not how language works at all, but the language and the meaning are organically related. And so Dryden, I think, theorizes much of that. It's also not terribly consistent, too. But his writings on wit, I think, more or less are. Whereas Spratt would be more saying, if we could reduce the language into just as many words as there are things. So, one word, one thing, concept. Which Swift later on, part 3 about his travel, the word machine. Well, let's just not have words at all. We'll just carry around short language. Okay.
Well, I'll just make a small comment. I'm thrilled. Thank you for giving me so many lovely ideas. And I work on things with women, poetry by women, about women in 7th century Arabic literature. But one thing that makes me delighted in taking this idea of a kind of feminism in an earlier period is, and this came up at our conference recently with the Association of Eastern Women's Studies, of which I'm a member. But it's very interesting. I guess it's interesting, and it's something I hope to see growth out of that. They almost just chop off, they just figure anybody from an earlier period couldn't possibly have anything interesting to say to women of today. And actually, it came up at this meeting, and there was a man, the one man at our women's studies meeting, said, yeah, I've noticed that somehow I'm teaching about women writers throughout pre-Islamic and Islamic history, and it's just never discussed. And it's almost as if there is an image there that the women weren't doing things that could be seen as feminist. And I'm very different expressions from my tradition from the West. Women as warriors, women as social critics, women as committed with their husbands to a